Welcome back to Steps to Health podcast. My name is Jocelyn. If you're new here, I'm a nurse and I work in Canada. Today is March the 19th and it's actually World Sleep Day, which is in light of the upcoming spring equinox. And I'm so happy to welcome spring back into my life. I've missed the sun more than usual this winter. If I had been aware that this was World Sleep Day, I probably would have made this episode a little bit different, but I didn't. So this episode is actually going to be focused on women's health. March 8th was International Women's Day, so I dove into the topic of women's healthcare and hormonal disturbances. For women's health, I wanted to quickly dive into some rather sad statistics. First, if you are a woman or if you are someone who loves a woman in whatever capacity, I want you to feel empowered to speak up for your right to appropriate health care. Your body is yours. You are well within your right to refuse care that infringes upon your bodily autonomy. You are not obligated to let healthcare professionals into your personal space just because they are a healthcare professional. You're allowed to say no. You can refuse the care if you feel that it is not appropriate for what you are there for. You are well within your right to ask questions. You are well within your right to fully understand what is happening to you and why before you give consent. I don't think a lot of people actually understand that, but when it comes to healthcare, you are the boss. You're the boss of your health. We work for you. It is your body, and it is your right, okay? So don't feel obligated to let us do whatever to you, unless you actually know what we're doing. It's okay to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this, or could you please explain what you're doing before you do it? Tacking on to that, I want you to feel empowered to ask for a second opinion, or ask again if you feel like your healthcare professional has brushed you off. This is actually pretty common for women in particular, especially when it comes to menstrual health or abdominal pain. We are often brushed off because it's easier to say, oh, it's probably, just normal woman things or what have you. When it comes to reproductive health, women often feel as though they are brushed off. I remember with my first pregnancy, I was made to feel ashamed for needing to take medication to prevent myself from throwing up all the time. I was nauseated to the point of being dehydrated, and the doctor who saw me was rather insistent that I might not actually need medication, but I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which means that I threw up to the point where I lost weight instead of gaining it while I was pregnant. And I was made to feel like a bad mom because I needed medication to prevent myself from throwing up all the time. During my second pregnancy, I developed something called pubis symphysis dysfunction, where my pubic joint, that joint there at the pubic bone, was kind of like way too relaxed and it was shifting around and causing intense pain. And the doctors all just kind of brushed me off like, oh, it happens to women. It's not that uncommon for second pregnancies. But just because we're women doesn't mean that we have to suffer through things. Okay, that's not an appropriate way to have our healthcare concerns approached. I'm sharing my experiences with you guys so that you know that you're not alone if you have suffered through similar experiences. And it's okay for us to speak out against it. If we've had poor experiences, let's share them. And let's make sure that other women feel empowered to share them as well. I have a friend with endometriosis and I have another friend with polycystic ovarian syndrome. And both of these friends spent years voicing their concerns to their doctors and suffering through debilitating periods before their doctors ran any tests. Some discomfort during your menstruation is normal, but pain that interferes with daily life is not normal. Do not let a doctor or nurse practitioner tell you otherwise. Use your voice. I've got your back. Pain is an invisible phenomenon that we all experience at one time or another in our life. Women experiencing pain often find themselves having to advocate harder to be taken seriously by healthcare professionals. On average, women in the emergency room wait 15 minutes longer than men for pain relief. They are also less likely to be given any opioid or narcotic pain medication. They're more likely to be given sedatives instead. The implicit bias of hysteria in women does still exist in today's world. This is perpetuated by both male and female caregivers. And that might not be the only thing impacting a woman's experience of pain, though. Women exhibit and experience pain differently than men do. Abdominal pain is particularly more difficult for women to experience because it is often blamed on, quote, normal, end quote, period pain that women may experience. Appendicitis might even be downplayed as menstrual cramps. In fact, according to a 2012 paper published in the International Journal of Surgery, there was a 12 to 23% error in diagnosing appendicitis in men and a 24 to 42% error in women. That's double. Okay, women were twice as likely to be misdiagnosed. Interesting little factoid that women just aren't taken as seriously as men are. It's quite sad, but it's still very common in the world right now. And we're very much still suffering the effects of inequality. Let's talk about hormones really quick. We hear and talk a lot about hormones, but what are they? Hormones are a chemical messenger that influences complex processes in the body. They travel inside of our bloodstream and can target different tissues and organs. Hormones are managed by our endocrine system, and the word endocrine breaks down into two parts. Endo, which means within or inside, and crine, which means to secrete. You have likely heard the primary reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Other hormones include growth hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin, insulin, melatonin. These are just some of the many hormones that our bodies actually produce. When you think about how many hormones there are and how their feedback loops are so heavily intertwined with one another and are so easily affected by our lifestyle, understanding how a disturbance in these hormones can affect our body's basic functions, it's easy to see how we can negatively impact our body and how we can positively affect our body. As a simple example I'd like to throw out there is that, and this kind of goes back into the whole World Sleep Day thing, sun emits blue light waves. These blue light waves slows down our secretion of melatonin, which is heavily involved in our sleep-wake cycles. And with the introduction of more and more blue light emitting devices, we find ourselves amidst a sudden influx of people suffering from poor sleep-wake cycles. The more you know. With that, my episode is coming to a close here, and I just want to issue a challenge to you, male or female, because next week I plan on talking more about hormones and imbalances and how we can identify and help resolve those without medication, if possible. I'd like you to pay attention to what kind of a diet you have. What is your sleep-wake cycle like? How often are you outside? How much exercise are you getting? What ways are you practicing mindfulness? Until next week, thank you so much for joining me once again for another episode of Steps Podcast. I would love to hear your feedback or any interesting little information or tidbits that you have that you'd like to share. You can go ahead and contact me on Twitter, Steps Podcast. You can contact me on my website, stepspodcast.com. Please subscribe to my channel, give me a comment. I'd love to hear from you at my YouTube channel, Steps Podcast. And if you're listening to this podcast only, you might want to find me on SoundCloud. Again, Steps Podcast. See you guys next week. Until then, take care.